You can educate yourself and be aware of these types of people and avoid getting involved in relationships. That includes casual sex, because that is usually the door that they use to burrow themselves into your life and start to rot your life from the inside out. My name is Michael Waddington and I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I've been practicing law since 2000. I have represented thousands of clients, I've cross-examined thousands of witnesses, and I've tried hundreds of cases. I decided to do a series of videos on cluster B personality traits. This video is one of a series about cluster B personality disorders. That's histrionic, borderline, antisocial, narcissistic. I'm doing this video to try to educate men out there that are going through a difficult situation and they're stuck in a relationship or facing criminal charges with someone who suffers from a personality disorder, and they're lost, confused, scared, and they don't know what's going on. So this video is going to focus mainly on men that have been falsely accused by someone that has a personality disorder. Both men and women suffer from personality disorders. In my line of work, I primarily defend men that are accused falsely of crimes and cases where the alleged victim or the false victim has a personality disorder. So I've got very good at cross-examining people that have personality disorders in exposing them for who they are, exposing their lies, and confronting them. I take a lot of pride in cross-examining lying witnesses, in dissecting their stories, in discrediting them live in open court in front of a jury. Now I'm going to talk in this video about borderline personality disorder. Now, I didn't just make this stuff up or read some article on the internet. I've been working with forensic psychologists and psychiatrists for about 20 years, hand in hand on many cases, hundreds of cases. I spend my time most commonly with forensic psychologists, and they help me understand people with personality disorders and expose them in cross-examination. As a matter of fact, my wife and I wrote 3 books on how to cross-examine these types of people, how to cross-examine forensic psychologists, and how to cross-examine law enforcement. Needless to say, I have some experience in dealing with this, aside from the people that have personality disorders that I've known over the years and I grew up around. So let's talk about borderline personality disorder. What do you need to know if you're in a situation and you're being accused, or you think you might be accused, or if you're just in a very uncomfortable relationship where you're trying to figure out what is going on with this person. This is not the person I thought they are. They are kind of crazy, they're scaring me, and they're dangerous. I'm basing this discussion off of the DSM-5. This is the manual that doctors, psychologists, and psychiatrists use to diagnose people with mental disorders, diseases, or defects. This is a mental disease or defect, having a personality disorder. And it's one of these things that you just can't treat with drugs. You can go to therapy to learn how to cope, but there is no real treatment for someone that has borderline personality disorder, at least not one that's been shown to be effective. So let's talk about it. What is borderline personality disorder? It's a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and effects, and marked impulsivity, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following criteria. So for a doctor to diagnose you, you have to have 5 or more of the following criteria. But this definition has a lot, so I'm going to go back and break it down a little more. This is the overall definition. It's a pervasive pattern, meaning that this is something that's ingrained, that happens repeatedly. It's a pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships. These people have trouble getting along with others. Their relationships are in shambles, usually with their family, their friends. They don't really have a lot of friends. Their marriages don't last. Their boyfriend-girlfriend situations don't last. And they're usually bouncing around in this chaotic world of instability. They also have a pattern of instability in self-image. These are people that one minute they're a cowboy, the next minute they're changing their gender, the next minute they are gay, the next minute they're straight, the next minute they're an alien, the next minute they're in their raves, the next minute they're a loving mother of 4 who's ultra-Orthodox religious, the next minute they are a pole dancer. If you look at the literature, these types of people with this personality disorder tend to go to a variety of those extremes. So criteria number 1, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. What I see in a lot of my cases where you get in a relationship with someone, you know, they're into it a couple days, maybe they're texting, maybe they go on one date, maybe they hook up, maybe not. And the person with the disorder will write the guy, and the guy doesn't write back. Immediately they start frantically text bombing the guy. They get really upset. They might show up at his house, show up at work in a very weird way that's kind of stalker-esque. Let's say they go on 2 dates with someone and then they see the guy on a date with another woman. They start harassing the woman, threatening the woman. They start acting frantic because they don't want to be abandoned. Now the guy that might be out with his mother, for example, buying her a Mother's Day gift, but this person with this mental disease may think, oh my God, he's going to abandon me, he's going to leave me. They'll even do that with children too. So if you're involved with someone and you're dating them and they're trying to break up relationships with your family, with your lifetime friends, with your kids, they might have a borderline personality disorder. But I've seen it a lot where they break off the relationship with family, friends, with the kids, because they're afraid that they're going to be abandoned, even though they may not even know you well, for those other people or your work. They get very jealous of your work. They want to see your text message, your phone. They're very stalkerish. Criteria number 2, a pattern. This word comes up a bit. A pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. They call this the roller coaster, up and down and up and down. Day number 1, we're in love, we're moving in, we're gonna get married, we're so in love, everything's great, he's the greatest man I've ever met. And they start idolizing this guy. He's the greatest, and he has a Harley, and he has this and that. Here comes the flip. When that guy that they said is so great, who's just like an average dude with a Harley, decides that he doesn't like them and doesn't call them back for the second date, then that guy's a piece of shit, he's a predator. They like to use words like predator, he's a rapist, he's an abuser. When you meet someone, they talk about all their exes and all the men in their life, and they're calling abusers emotionally abusive, and they often just say abuser. Like, what do you mean? Oh, he didn't ask you on a second date, he's an abuser? That is a huge red flag. But abusive, bad, men suck, men are shit, you're gonna be next. And they're usually describing this, a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships. Because when they get in, man, they're in. These are the people you meet at a bar, and the next thing you know, they're living with you and you have this wild weekend of fun and everything's great until it's time to leave. And they're not leaving. They are not leaving. And you might be going to jail. And you might think I'm making this up. I see this quite frequently. Your ass might be going to jail before they leave that relationship because they're afraid that you might never call them back. Now, a lot of these people have abuse in their past, maybe have daddy issues, they have other psychological issues that lead to this. It doesn't mean you're gonna fix them, and it doesn't make them any easier to deal with. It makes it much worse. Last thing I'm gonna say about that, remember the roller coaster, hot and cold. Now, there's a book out there called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. If you're in a relationship like this, read this book, it's very good. It's written by psychiatrists. I Hate You, Don't Leave Me is about people with borderline personality disorder, dealing with them, how difficult they are to be around. A lot of these people, when you think about them as a coworker, they're the type that you meet and they give you this creepy vibe. Like, you might ask them to go to lunch one time because you feel bad for them or you're trying to be a team player, and next minute they're showing up at your house and you're their best friend. Again, hot and cold. And when you don't reciprocate, you're done. And it could turn into criminal charges. Criteria number 3, identity disturbance. Identity disturbance. That's what I was talking about in the beginning, where one minute they're this, the next minute they're that. Their sexuality is constantly fluctuating. Constantly fluctuating, that's the key. Depending on who they're friends with, that'll determine their sexuality. It's identity disturbance, marked by persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. What we're talking about is a person is very difficult to deal with and you don't want in a relationship, unfortunately. I mean, I know people tell me, oh, you're bashing these mentally ill people. I'm not. I've seen enough men's lives ruined, their lives destroyed, and some in prison because of people like this. So let them go deal with it through a psychologist or psychiatrist. You are not their therapist. If you want to go down with the ship, you're not a hero. You're going to be labeled as probably as a sex offender or wife beater. And you're probably never going to see your kids if you get tangled up in a relationship like this. And if you do, your kids are going to be brainwashed and hate you, and you're going to be fighting to just get custody of them and draining your resources because you got involved with someone like this. So I take this very seriously. This is not a joke. I'm trying to do this to help people to avoid this. Number 4, impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. So these people are impulsive and they're doing things that are impulsive that are self-damaging, that are harmful. Examples in the book: spending. They'll go out and just buy expensive stuff, often with your money. Sex. They'll immediately jump into bed with someone they just met, or have sex on the hood of a car in a parking garage with a guy that they just met at the Aerosmith concert 5 minutes before. And you're like, wow, this is fun, dude. This is crazy. This is wild. This is back in high school. Wrong. Spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. And often it's all of those. So I knew someone that was a health nut. They're super healthy, and I started listening and hearing more about the background. And then a year ago, they were a cocaine addict, and then they were religious, and they were going to, become some sort of celibate monk. And I'm like, this person's probably a borderline, and the person is very impulsive. So again, impulsive with spending, sex, substance, that's alcohol and drugs, reckless driving, and binge eating. Number 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, threats, or self-mutilating behavior. So if you're with someone who cuts themselves, or is always constantly cutting themselves, threatening to hurt themselves, threatening to kill themselves, that is squarely within one of these criteria. Now, you need to get those people the treatment they need, but this is often used as a manipulative ploy. Get them the treatment they need. But if you meet someone and they're showing you all the cuts on their wrist, and they're telling you this crazy life history, and they're wanting to run off to Vegas and get married and have 20 kids, and they're in the drugs and alcohol, and they've had a ton of bad relationships and daddy issues and husband issues and children issues, you're probably talking to a borderline, and you should avoid getting into a relationship with them at all costs if you want to avoid being falsely accused. If you don't care and you think I'm full of it, do whatever you want. I'm not your father. Number 6, affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. Instability. 1 minute you're talking to them at breakfast. Oh, bye honey, I'll see you at lunch. By 11 o'clock, nothing has changed. And they're blowing up your phone. They're threatening you. They're threatening divorce. You come back, you have lunch, you calm them down. Everything's cool. You go out to have dinner. Right before bed, the person starts another argument, some crazy argument about some non-issue. Problem is a lot of psychiatrists will be like, and psychologists will be like, oh, it might not matter to you, but it matters to them. Okay, great. That may be true. But do you want someone like that in your life who wants to keep bringing up the fact that your mother brought a cheesecake for Christmas dinner when she promised a cherry pie, and that becomes a huge fight in your life, for example, for the next 20 years for no reason out of the blue? Or where the person doesn't get their way and at lunch and you couldn't meet them for lunch because you have a mission planning brief. They're mad about that and they're fear of abandonment. So next thing you know, you're sleeping in the basement for 6 months. Because they're mad at you. That is bad for a relationship, and it's very difficult to live like that unless you just love a lot of stress and you love living on the edge under a lot of stress and anxiety. Avoid people like that. Number 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. And this is where the drug use, the jumping into relationships, people that tend to jump into a relationship, sex relationship, or they run off someone because it makes them feel good, they get that dopamine hit, they get those feel-good chemicals, the endorphins, the adrenaline, all that. They're constantly chasing that because they're empty. There's a constant feeling of emptiness, and that ties in the fear of abandonment. It also ties into why people cut themselves. And they're always trying to search for, what is my identity? Maybe I'm not happy because of this, and maybe I'm not happy because of that. The truth is, some of them aren't happy because they don't take care of themselves. They mistreat other people. They get coming back to them how they treat others. Like, you can't go around doing things like threatening people, abusing people, mistreating them, being crazy 1 minute, screaming, yelling, and making a huge scene at a party, and then not understand that, well, maybe my boyfriend doesn't want to be with me because I'm acting like that. They have to get their emotions under control and deal with those underlying issues. Although this is very difficult to treat. You can look it up. People have tried a variety of methods, psychotherapy. It's very difficult to treat borderline personality disorder. So whether you want to be involved with someone like that is your choice. Number 8, inappropriate, intense, anger, difficulty controlling anger. We see this where we have a husband comes from a day of work and the wife's like berating him, screaming at him. And I'm going to repeat this, inappropriate anger. It's one thing if you come home and you find out your husband just blew the bank account on a new bass boat and you guys were going to use that to pay for the kids' education. That might be appropriate. But inappropriate anger. I had a lady that in a case recently where if the husband wouldn't buy her diamond Tiffany earrings, for example, while he was deployed to Afghanistan, or pick up the phone every time she called, she would start threatening him with divorce, and just he would get hundreds of horrible, hateful text messages calling him all these names, threatening divorce, you'll never see your children again. And then he wouldn't write back because he was on a mission. And then the mood would subside, and then it would be like, oh, hey, when you get back, where did you want to have your welcome home dinner? It gave me a headache reading these thousands of crazy messages. But that's the type of person. So you need to look like, how's the person texting you, calling you, interacting with you? And if it is inappropriate, intense anger, in difficulty controlling anger, frequent displays of temper, constant anger. They display extreme sarcasm, enduring bitterness, and verbal outbursts. So think of Karens, someone who's very sarcastic, very negative. A lot of guys like people like that for some reason. And everywhere you go, like, oh, they're the victim. Look at that person. They're berating the young waitress who's trying to serve your dinner, or they got to file complaints against the Starbucks barista because they didn't put enough sugar in the drink or whatever. Those are all red flags. These people tend to be very impulsive with sex, with spending, with money. So if you want to pick up women in the Vegas casino that are super duper fun for one night, you might end up with someone who is a borderline, especially if they have all this baggage and other family members that they've destroyed. Recurrent physical fights is one that falls up under this. So again, if you have a wife who's constantly, or girlfriend who's hitting you, slapping you, pushing you, that is one of the criteria. Last one, transient stress-related paranoid ideations and severe dissociative symptoms. That one is a little more complicated. Under the last criteria, where I talk about dissociative symptoms that usually occur during extreme stress, when the person's under stress, it could be they got to take care of the kids and the husband's deployed, or they have a term paper, or they've been watching social media and they neglected what they need to do, or they're having trouble at work, which they tend to do. That stress will compound. It just feeds into making the roller coaster go up and down, higher and higher and higher. Other red flags, someone who's easily bored. They may constantly seek something to do. They're constantly moving on from one man to the next man, one event to the other. They'll cheat on you in a second. You give them a tenth of a second to go to sleep with another person or run off with another person, they will. The anger is often elicited when a caregiver or lover is seen as neglectful, withholding, uncaring, or abandoning. So this anger is often triggered when the lover or caregiver, so like you're their boyfriend, is neglectful, withholding, uncaring, or abandoning. Meaning if you're not there constantly giving them emotional support and affirmations, they will lash out violently. Now that doesn't start at the beginning usually. It usually takes a little while. Usually at first it's love bombing. But after a few weeks and sometimes months, they can't control it. So that is a good reason to date someone, get to know them before you run off and marry them. Young soldiers out there, wink, wink, that like to go run off and marry someone they picked up at the bar in Itaewon or at the Ville out in Korea. And they marry that person. Next thing you know, their life is forever changed. The same thing applies for more experienced and older men and officers too. A lot of officers get in these relationships with people that are like the consummate victim. And next thing you know, they're being drugged down this rabbit hole of emotional abuse, harassment, stalking, and threats. They love to threaten people's careers. I mean, I make a living off of defending people whose careers are being threatened by mentally ill, lying victims. I mean, I do. And you may say, well, wait a minute, isn't that easy to defend someone? Absolutely not. It's actually super hard to defend someone where the person is setting them up, conniving, and plotting it out for years. And the person is very emotional, because the juries love emotion. They tend to believe emotional people. They're very emotional, they're very persuasive, and they're very conniving in evil. And then they're going to think, my God, how's this person acting like this? Probably because the guys did something to her, and probably because she's telling the truth. And then the rules of evidence don't allow us to get into all this backstory, all the back behaviors. We're very limited with what we can bring up in cases where it involves a borderline. And under the rules of evidence, the rules go to block a lot of our cross-examinations of these alleged victims, even if it's a false lying victim. So don't assume it's some easy walk in the park, because you know it's not true what she's saying, because it isn't. Those are the toughest cases, because literally an innocent man can go to jail. So the bottom line is, if you're involved with someone with any of these criteria, you need to come up with a way to get out of the situation with your life and career and freedom intact. Talk to someone that you trust that can kind of tell you how to build the evidence, because you have to build a record. You have to build evidence, and you have to come up with a way to get out of that situation. Because as one client told me, the woman in his life that was borderline, and she falsely accused them. We won the case. She always had to have someone she hated that she was always fighting with. Whether it was the clerk at the store, the base commander, him, it was usually him, her mother-in-law, her mother. As long as she had someone that she hated the most, he wasn't in the spotlight until he became in the spotlight. There are ways to get out of these situations where you're not the main person they're coming after. But you have to do it very carefully, and you have to have evidence built up that will go to prove your innocence, because they will assume you're guilty. In the military, they assume you're guilty. There's a belief that you believe all victims. If they're emotional, you believe them. And this idea that we honor their truth. We don't disrespect their feelings. So if I'm lying about something, and that's my feelings, and that's my truth, even though it's a lie, the military prosecutors will often run with that, and they will charge you. And the same thing in state courts. They're a little less likely to charge bogus cases in state court, though. But in the military, they will try to take you down based on the word of one person alone, and they will try hard up until the end to convince the jury that you got to believe, look at that raw emotion. You can't fake that raw emotion. I've heard that so many times. Like, well, yeah, actually you can. For a borderline, it's super easy. That is their entire life. Their entire life is emotional outburst, calm period, emotional outburst, calm period. If you convict someone of a crime based on the fact that someone is crying and they're emotional, you're going to get innocent men getting put in jail left and right. And it's our job to stop that from happening. But you can educate yourself and be aware of these types of people and avoid getting involved in relationships that includes casual sex, because that is usually the door that they use to burrow themselves into your life and start to rot your life from the inside out.